Well, good day, my friends. It's your old pal Jordan the Lion. How are you all doing today? I hope you said great. Today's going to be a fascinating day. We are going to talk about a guy who I think really the only word that comes to mind is hero. The guy lived a life that literally is what movies are made of. They made a movie about his life, Walking Tall. He was a sheriff who decided he was going to not take it. And boy, was he fascinating. The guy was shot several times, died at the age of 36, and for all the involvement with trying to take down the mafia and everything else, it's kind of a crazy way that he ended up passing away. But after his most famous altercation, he was in the hospital and needed tons of surgeries, and it was Elvis Presley who came in and decided to pay for everything. So let's go talk about the story and visit the grave of Mr. Buford Pusser. Daze with Jordan the Lion and you all. It begins right now. Are you ready to do some exploring around Tennessee and Mississippi? So we're out here on the Mississippi and Tennessee state lines, and that's a big part of the story here for Buford Pusser. Buford Pusser was the sheriff of McNairy County, which was the county that starts here at the border and continues inward. At the time, it was a very corrupt place. It was, illegal whiskey stills they were trying to break up. There was prostitution, gambling, and in this section where the state line was, a lot of the law enforcement was very complicit and involved in it, helped. They would get kickbacks, and so Buford himself had experienced an occurrence here when he was a young man. He had come to a place here on the border called the Plantation Club, and he had won back in the craps, in the back room where they were playing craps, won a bunch of money, and then the men jumped him, beat him up, took everything out of his pockets, and then threw him outside and left him there. He ended up getting himself to a hospital and had all of his lacerations and everything taken care of. But he knew then that it was a corrupt place, and that really the only way to take it down was to become part of the solution. It didn't happen right away though. At first he got a job in his town as a mortician's assistant, and that got him interested into wanting to become a mortician. So he went to school in Chicago, and while he was there, he was a big boy. He was 6'6", 250 pounds, and he decided to start wrestling. So he started wrestling there, known as Buford the Bull, and he would sometimes wrestle a bear. And that's where he met the woman that would become his wife. They met there, fell in love, and eventually got married. And then a week after they got married, Buford was arrested at his home because the man that owned the establishment where Buford himself had been jumped accused Buford and his friends of coming back and beating the crap out of him and taking their money. And so Buford ended up going to trial over this, and he was able to provide proof that he was still in the state of Illinois, was working and everything. Could not have been possibly the person who did it. But just to tell you how corrupt things were, going against him was the man who owned the establishment, and he had the sheriffs backing him up saying, well, yeah, Buford's a known troublemaker in this area. So that's kind of what got Buford started. When he was acquitted from this trial, he wasn't making enough money as a wrestler, and his father was the police chief of their town, and he said, why don't you take over my job? And so that's what he did. He ended up taking over as police chief. He found that job to be kind of slow, so then he became constable, and that's where he could go out and start shutting down the whiskey stills and things like that, and then eventually decided to run for McNeary sheriff. And while he was running, the man who was already sheriff was really tied in with they had a Dixie mafia and a state line mob, and one was in Mississippi and one was in Tennessee, and he was involved with them, and it was very obvious that Buford was going to win the election. And 2 days before the election, the incumbent sheriff ended up dead. And many people believe that was a message to Buford, hey, this could happen to you. So now you can tell, like over here and right here where those establishments would have been are now gone. But one of the main perpetrators was a place called the Shamrock Motel. And a lot of tourists would come and stay here because they offered a very cheap ham dinner. It was like 49 cents or something like that. So people would stay here and they would prey on the tourists. They would often cheat them, rob them, knowing that the sheriff or the police were in their coat pockets and would do nothing about it. So one of the times that Sheriff Buford got called out here was a couple had said that they had stayed here and that the owner, Miss Hathcock, had pulled a gun on them and stolen the lady's purse. And so when Sheriff Buford Pusser came out here to confront her with 2 of his deputies, they showed up and she said that she would talk to him in her room that was right off the side of the office. And so he went in to talk to her, and she pulled a gun out from underneath her apron or from her pocket and turned around and said, "I'm going to kill you." And the other deputies heard it. Buford Pusser fell back onto the bed. She took a shot, missed him, then took another shot and the gun jammed. He pulled out his gun and he fired 3 times, hitting her once in the shoulder, which completely turned her around, shooting her again in the chest and then in the head and killing her. And so this was something that a lot of people at the time, or not a lot of people, but the people on the seedy side of things thought that it was a setup and that Buford Pusser had went there to kill her. And so she was in partners with a man named Towhead White. He was partners with the establishment, and so Towhead White was also a bootlegger who made a lot of money bootlegging, and Buford Pusser had ran him out of town. He kept busting his whiskey stills, and at that time it was just a fine. You just pay the fine and continue on with business, and then you get busted again, you pay the fine. But it was getting more and more to where Pusser was cracking down on it. And so eventually Towhead White's whole whiskey still in Mississippi over there on the across the border ended up getting busted, and he ended up in prison. He and a cellmate ended up escaping from jail about a year later, and a month after that, Buford Pusser tried to pull over a car with Mississippi plates, and when he pulled him over and started walking to the passenger side, they opened fire and shot him several times. Throughout his time as sheriff, he would end up being shot 8 times, stabbed 7 times. He would end up having to kill 2 of the assailants. And yeah, they opened fire on him. They did not kill him, but this was crazy. So while Buford Pusser was in the hospital, Towhead White was the one who was responsible, and he actually went and turned himself in. He knew that being on the run for as long as he had, and with Buford Pusser being shot, he knew they were looking for him. So he ended up going back to jail, and he was able to hire some men to perpetrate an attack on Buford Pusser, and we're gonna go to where that attack happened. You can see right here, even the old gas stations, pretty much everything that was over here is now gone, but they do have, just as I moved a little past where I was, they do have a sign talking about the location of the Shamrock. We were just literally right here, and there's a sign right here. I mean, this is absolutely legendary history. It says, historic Tennessee-Mississippi state line. Site of Shamrock Motel since the 1930s. The state line was known for illegal drugs, bootleg whiskey, gambling, and prostitution. Death, bloodshed, and illegal activities continued throughout the 1960s. Buford Pusser was elected to McNairy County Sheriff in 1964, and his promise was to clean up the state line. On February 1st, 1966, Sheriff Pusser visited the Shamrock to serve warrants on Louise Hathcock, owner. She invited him to her office, room 1. Room 1 was a little bedroom right off the office that she would stay in when she was working the front desk at night. So it says she invited him to her office, room 1. Allegedly, Miss Hathcock attempted to ambush and kill Sheriff Pusser, but was not successful. Sheriff Pusser shot and killed Miss Hathcock that day in room 1. The concrete foundation of the Shamrock Motel and Restaurant are all that remains today. So it would have been that whole section right over here. Louise Hathcock, who owned the Shamrock Motel and tried to shoot Buford Pusser in that room. That was the same room she shot her husband in a couple of years before. She claimed he was beating her and she shot him in self-defense. So this is the New Hope Church out on New Hope Road. And it's believed that this is the church that the assailants were hiding behind. They had, I believe, a 65 Cadillac, black Cadillac. And it was said that they were laying in wake here. So they could have either been, you know, parked right up here, up this side, or even right up this side. But apparently once they saw Buford Pusser's car go by, the 3 men in the car took off from here without their lights on and started to follow him down this road. So as the sheriff and his wife Pauline would be making their way out here, this is actually where they would be ambushed. The actual site of where the men that were laying in wake would flip the lights on and start shooting. They have a couple of memorial signs over here. The sheriff did not die, Pauline did. You see, 12th of August, ambush site. It says here on August 12th, 1967, at the breaking of day, Sheriff Buford Pusser, accompanied by his wife Pauline, were answering a call to a disturbance on New Hope Road. Car drove up beside them and started firing into the sheriff's car. Mrs. Pusser was struck with bullets from a military rifle. Sheriff Pusser, taken by surprise, sped away, driving further down New Hope Road in an attempt to outrun his assailants. 2 miles south from here is the second ambush site. Yeah. So we're gonna go down this road and we'll find that other site and I'll tell you about that. When Buford first became sheriff, it was so kind of tame at that time that he wouldn't even carry a gun. That's where that whole carrying that big stick came from. He would basically just carry around part of a tree and then turned it into a big stick and carried that around for a while until he was stabbed and had several attempts on his life, and he was carrying a gun from then on. So here at this intersection site, they have another historical plaque, and it says the 12th of August ambush. Sheriff Pusser stopped his car here at this site trying to check his wife's injuries. The assailant's car came back into sight and started firing into the sheriff's car again. Mrs. Pusser was shot in the head this time and died. Sheriff Pusser was shot in the face, suffering severe bone and tissue damage. After spending 18 days in a Memphis hospital, he returned to his position as full-time sheriff of McNairy County. So yeah, he was lucky to live. He did not get to attend her funeral or anything, unfortunately, because he was in the hospital and he had to have, I want to say, 16 surgeries on his face over the rest of his life. And as I said, Elvis Presley was so inspired by him that he paid for it. First, after the attack, Buford would say that he recognized the assailants and gave them names. And then he said one he wasn't sure about. He said it was dark, it could have been him or could not have been him, a man named Nix. But he always knew that Towhead White was the man behind all of this, and many believe that when Towhead White was eventually killed, he was with the wife of a man. She was estranged at the time, but they were going to a motel that she owned with her husband, and when they pulled up, her husband claimed that Towhead White shot at him through the car, and so he returned fire and killed him. But a lot of people didn't believe that was what happened. They think that Towhead White was already dead in the car. His body was cold by the time anybody got there to inspect it, and that it was kind of set up to look that way, and that possibly Buford Pusser got his revenge in this way. So we're gonna go visit Buford's grave, and his house is actually open as a museum, and it has his last car that he died in, or man, that's a crazy story. We will come back for all that. That is an entire experience all by itself. So we will come back and do the museum and everything, see the car and his house and all that stuff. But I do want to visit his grave while we're here. Unfortunately, the museum's just not open today, so that's why we'll do it another day, along with seeing like the jail and all that stuff. As we enter Adamsville, you can tell they're proud of him. They have a festival here every year, home of Sheriff Buford Pusser. Incidentally, at the time, the youngest sheriff in Tennessee history at the age of 26. There he is with that big stick. And they also recognize it's the home of Ashley Durham, Miss Teen Tennessee of 2006, Miss Tennessee of 2011, and first runner-up for Miss USA in 2011. Home of Daddy-O Dewey Phillips, rock and roll pioneer. Tell him Phillips sent you. He used to play Elvis's records. He was famous for that, helped break Elvis. And then of course, visit the Pusser Home and Museum, which we'll go by because I want to just show it to you, but we'll explore it the next time. I'm gonna name the street after him. Even though it's not open, they do have the gates open. Buford Pusser Home and Museum. Then they have right out front, Sheriff Buford Pusser Home and Museum. And this literally was his home with Pauline and the kids. We will come back and check this out. I'm told there's a lot worth seeing in here. Really amazing experience. Gosh, leaving that day of the ambush, they just had no idea how much their life would change. And the car he would have passed away in is, they still have it, it's in there. Lots of flowers, I like seeing that. Everybody gets a lot of visitors. So out here, it's the tallest one, definitely in the section. You can see Buford Pusser. Buford Pusser, his wife Pauline, Sheriff of McNairy County, Tennessee. He walked tall. Then there's Pauline's individual headstone. And then, I believe those are his parents. Right there. And then he actually has his own individual one right here. Yeah, he survived. You'd think somebody that had been shot that many times, stabbed that many times, and especially after losing his wife, that he would have found a new line of work, but as we saw on that sign out there, he went right back to work. Crazy. They did end up making a movie, Walking Tall. Not very accurate, but he had went and signed a deal for a second movie to be made, and he was going to be in it. And he was traveling back home from a fair. His daughter was following behind in another car with some of her friends, and he had a Corvette and apparently punched the gas a little too hard and went off road and went through the sunroof that was open, went completely out of the car, and the car burst into flames. And that's the car that they have on display at the home. Some people probably wouldn't approve of, but it's part of his story. I mean, this guy lived a life, no doubt about it. He's a legend. Buford Pusser. Rest in peace, Buford and Pauline. Thank you everyone for watching. We'll see you next time. We'll go to the house and see some more of the sights in this area. Have a great night and goodbye.